Story 1. Certain species of nautilus have a detachable reproductive organ with its own swimming appendage. Males send this organ on a one-way mission to transfer sperm and fertilize eggs. Story 2. Pluto has not completed an orbit around the Sun since its discovery. Story 3. Some companies are over 1,000 years old. 90% of them are in Japan. Story 4. I see a lot of facts about octopuses, but what I find most interesting, besides their intelligence and 3 hearts, is that they only live about 3 years. They mate once and then die. Story 5. George Stephen Morrison, the United States Navy captain who commanded local American forces during the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which led to the escalation of United States involvement in the Vietnam War, was the father of Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. Story 6. About 2/3 of your ancestors are female. This is due to pedigree collapse. Although you would theoretically have 2 parents, for grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on, going back about 30 generations, that is, to the Middle Ages, would imply roughly 1 billion ancestors, more than the total population then. In reality, the same individuals appear multiple times in a family tree. For example, people of English ancestry will have King Edward I as an ancestor on dozens of distinct lines because of his many children, including illegitimate ones. Consequently, a larger proportion of males than females leave no descendants. Story 7. Ireland's population is still lower than it was before the Irish potato famine. Story 8. Out of all the animals in the world, the most successful hunter, with a stunning success rate of 95%, is the dragonfly. Story 9. The only member of the rock band ZZ Top who did not have a beard was the drummer, Frank Beard. Story 10. There is a species of jellyfish called Turritopsis dohrnii, also known as the immortal jellyfish. I had to Google the name, laughing out loud. It can literally reverse its aging process. When it is injured, sick, or even stressed, it reverts its cells to their earliest form, essentially starting its life over again. It is as if the creature figured out how to cheat death, hitting the reset button on its existence. That is astonishing, in my opinion. Story 11. There is a giant hexagon larger than Earth at the North Pole of Saturn. It is permanent and composed of hurricanes. Story 12. Venus flytraps are found naturally in only one area of the world, the coastal plain of the Carolinas. Story 13. Mazda has had the 2 most oddly specific product recalls in automotive history. 1. Mazda recalled a number of Mazda 6 vehicles because spiders infested the fuel lines. For unknown reasons, the issue affected only a single model and a single generation, and other Mazda models were unaffected. 2. Mazda recalled several vehicles because the infotainment system failed when users attempted to listen to the 94.9 broadcast of the Seattle public radio station. It was not the frequency. Stations on 94.9 in other cities worked fine. The problem was specific to that Seattle station. Story 14. We do not actually know what song the monsters are dancing to in Monster Mash. The song we hear is the singer recounting the monsters dancing, not the song they are dancing to. Story 15. The bristlemouth fish, also known as cyclothone, is estimated to have a population of up to 1 quadrillion individuals, making it the most abundant vertebrate on Earth. Story 16. At one point in Hawaii, you were more likely to be attacked by Ezra Miller than by a shark. Story 17. There was a shipwreck in 1664, another in 1785, and a third in 1820. Each had 1 survivor, and each survivor was named Hugh Williams. Story 18. Tasmanian devil populations are heavily impacted by a contagious cancer that causes facial tumors. When devils bite each other's faces, cancer cells spread from one individual to the next. Because of low genetic variation, the cancer cells can evade the new host's immune system and multiply. These cells originated as normal Tasmanian devil cells but have become a transmissible parasitic lineage. By phylogenetic classification, they are considered descendants of Tasmanian devils and therefore are marsupials. Similar contagious cancers have been found in dogs, Syrian hamsters, and clams. Story 19. Egypt is older than many people realize. There were archaeologists in ancient Egypt. Story 20. Elvis was originally blonde. There is only one country between Norway and North Korea. Story 21. Hummingbirds' feet are so small they are used only for perching, scratching, and nest building. They do not use their feet to launch into flight. Their wings do all the work. The order name Apodiformes, meaning footless, fits when you see a hummingbird in flight because its feet are nearly invisible. Although they have feet, they do not have knees. Story 2246 before Christ was the longest year in human history, lasting 445 days. Story 23. The villagers of Llandwin, Wales, elected a goat named Bryn as their honorary mayor in 1999. Bryn, a charismatic goat known for his impressive horns and calm demeanor, was chosen in a light-hearted ceremony. The villagers believed that having a goat as mayor would bring unique charm to the town and attract tourists. Bryn fulfilled his duties by appearing at local events, leading parades, and becoming a beloved symbol of the community's spirit and humor. Story 24. The botulinum toxin used in Botox injections is so toxic that the entire annual global supply contains less than 1 gram. Story 25. Female kangaroos are born with 2 lateral vaginas. During birth, a third median vagina develops to serve as the birth canal. Story 26. During the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the Louisiana Purchase, the group encountered Sacagawea's brother. His tribe helped the expedition survive the winter. Story 27. Few mummies survive to the present day because people used to eat them. Story 28. The 1989 song Rhythm Nation by Janet Jackson can crash some laptops that use certain hard drives. The song has a resonant frequency that matches the natural frequency of those drives and can cause them to shut down. Story 29. Some octopuses can lobotomize themselves if they do not chew their food properly. Story 30. Birds cannot taste spice. Peppers evolved so the spice would deter mammals and allow only birds to eat them and spread their seeds. Humans later began eating peppers because they enjoyed the sensation and bred them to be much hotter than they are in nature. Story 31. The 26 richest people in the world own as much wealth as the poorest 3.8 billion people. Story 32. The 4 people of Papua New Guinea practiced ritual funerary cannibalism. Unfortunately, a prion disease called kuru began to spread. It was transmitted when members of the tribe consumed infected human flesh. In the late stages of kuru, it caused paralysis and a period of immobility. This led to a thin layer of fat developing around the body. Apparently, this layer of fat made infected bodies especially desirable, so they were prioritized in funerary cannibalism. Story 33. For most of human history, no one had flown until 1903. By 1969, people were walking on the moon. It seems impossible that humans went from a plane that flew for only 12 seconds to traveling to the moon and back in less than a single lifetime. For reference, it took roughly 200 years to go from flintlocks to automatic weapons, and humans have a strong propensity for killing one another. Story 34. The company that makes Lamborghinis began as a tractor manufacturer and only started making cars to spite Ferrari. Story 35. Over 50% of Americans have a 6th grade literacy level or lower. Story 36. I found this out yesterday. In 2011, a man in Australia discovered what was essentially an infinite money hack on automated teller machines. He could press transfer and move any amount between his accounts. The machine indicated the transaction was cancelled, but the transfers actually went through. He was able to spend millions of dollars over 4.5 months, until his conscience prompted him to stop. He tried to turn himself in several times and even appeared on television to admit he was taking millions from banks. Despite his attempts, it took some time for authorities to investigate. When they finally did, he received a 1-year jail sentence and was required to repay only a fraction of the money he had taken. An unusual outcome. Story 37. The average number of skeletons in the human body is greater than 1. Pregnant women increase the average. Story 38. After surgery that involves the intestines being returned to the abdominal cavity, the surgeon repositions them and they generally settle on their own. It is a distinctive sensation when you feel the intestines shifting. Story 39. There are more unique ways to shuffle a standard deck of cards than the estimated number of stars in the universe. Story 40. The entire Wikipedia can be downloaded, and its total file size is smaller than that of the latest Call of Duty. Story 41. During the last Ebola outbreak in the United States, you were more likely to date Taylor Swift and have her write a hit song about your breakup than to contract the disease. Story 42. From the reference frame of the center of the sun, if you chart your path through the solar system, you are unlikely to occupy the same point in space more than once in your lifetime. Story 43. Canada, California, and Tokyo all have roughly similar populations. Story 44. The atoms in your body are around 13 billion years old. They aren't yours. They've been here as long as life itself. You're just the latest assembly. Story 45. Counting to a billion, if you say one number per second, would take about 31.7 years. In practice, many numbers take longer to say, so it could take more than 60 years and possibly over 100 years. If you received $10,000 every day, it would take about 274 years to reach $1 billion. Story 46. Europeans were familiar with the great auk and called it penguin. They hunted it to extinction. When they explored the Antarctic, they found similar-looking birds and applied the same name. However, the birds we call penguins today are not related to the great auk. Story 47. This is going to get buried, but coconut trees are more closely related to grasses than to any other tree on the planet. Story 48. Jimmy Carter is the only former United States president to have lived for more than 40 years after leaving office. He is also the longest-lived former president. Donald Trump was the oldest man to be inaugurated as president. He is also the first president since the 1890s to serve non-consecutive terms. Story 49. All studio recordings by the Beatles were released within 7 years, from March 1963 to May 1970. Story 50. 9% of United States presidents either died or were born on the 4th of July. Everyone knows John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who died on the 4th of July, 1826, but there are also James Monroe, who died on the 4th of July, 1831, and Calvin Coolidge, who was born on the 4th of July, 1872. Story 51. New Mexico predates the country of Mexico. Spain established the territory of New Mexico in 1592, while Mexico gained independence from Spain and adopted its name in 1821. Both names derive from a valley in present-day Mexico. Story 52. In World War II, Japanese soldiers tried to eat a United States president. Story 53. The Tyrannosaurus rex lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than to the Stegosaurus. Story 54. More men were killed in the 8th Air Force over Europe than Marines in the Pacific during World War II. That blows my mind. Story 55. If humans had the metabolism of hummingbirds, scaled up for our body sizes, we would die within 24 to 48 hours of being born. Story 56. If you knock a tooth out and put it back in the socket, it will regrow its roots and be saved. Story 57. In the 1950s, the Knights Hospitaller, the same order from the Crusades, had a few bomber planes. In our timeline, there was a Crusader Air Force. The Air Force no longer exists, but the Knights do. They have observer status at the United Nations and issue passports. Story 58. During the George W. Bush administration at Fort Bragg, they trained monkeys to use harpoons for combat. The monkeys escaped with the harpoons and ran through Fayetteville, terrorizing the town. We were warned to avoid public restrooms because there might be monkeys armed with harpoons. There is nothing on the internet about this, and the only reference I could find was in Will Ferrell's You're Welcome, America comedy special. Story 59. The head of security at the World Trade Center buildings at the time of the September 11, 2001 attacks had previously worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and had repeatedly warned about the threat posed by Osama bin Laden. Story 60. Some people alive today were born before World War I and before the first commercial flight, and they still carry antibodies to the Spanish flu. Story 61. Most fish do not fart, but herring do. A study found they likely communicate by releasing gas. It is like their own version of social media. Instead of Twitter, it is Squeaker. Story 62. In all 50 states, it takes more hours of training to become a barber than to become a police officer. Story 63. United States Geography Fun Facts. Reno, Nevada is west of Los Angeles, California. California is a state on the West Coast. Detroit, Michigan is east of Atlanta, Georgia. Georgia is a state on the East Coast. Maine is the closest United States state to the African continent. Story 64. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the opening of the first Pizza Hut than to the construction of the Giza pyramids. The first Pizza Hut opened in Wichita, Kansas on June 15, 1958. That means the chain's opening was about 500 years closer to Cleopatra's lifetime than the construction of the Giza pyramids. Story 65. Sea otters have a pouch in their armpits where they store their favorite rocks. They use these rocks to crack open shellfish when they are hungry. Story 66. Assault is making someone fear harm. Battery is physically hitting someone. Story 67. A circle is not the only shape with constant width. Another example is the Riulow's triangle. This property allows it to be used as the basis for designing a drill bit that can drill a square hole, although there is a slight fillet in the corner. I told people at a couple of workplaces about this in the early 1990s, before the internet became widespread. At the time, very few people believed me, and I could not easily back it up. In fact, most of the people I told took the proverbial wind out of me afterward for believing something they thought was so wrong. Story 68. People can flex their inner ear muscles. Some do so voluntarily. Others do not. Produces a dull, roaring sound that drowns out other noises. Story 69. Deaths caused by black widow spiders are extremely rare in the United States. In fact, there has not been a fatality in 10 years. Story 70. The British spent more than 60 years paying other nations and companies to end the slave trade. Even after payments, some governments and firms reneged and continued trading in enslaved people. That prompted the British to send the Royal Navy to Africa to intercept slave ships and free hundreds of thousands of people. Given the resistance the British faced, had they not acted, it is conceivable that the Atlantic slave trade would still exist today. Story 71. The longest recorded flight of a chicken was 13 seconds. That is some serious airtime for a bird with wings. Story 72. There is a greater than 50% chance that two people in a group of 23 share a birthday. Story 73. The orchestra hit sound effect popular in the 1980s and 1990s rhythm and blues and pop music, and in retro-sounding music today such as Bruno Mars, was originally sampled from a recording of the Firebird by Igor Stravinsky, specifically the opening chord of the movement The Infernal Dance. Story 74. I have always liked the example about the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. Imagine someone gave you $1 million and told you to spend $1,000 every day and come back when you ran out of money. You would return with no money left in 3 years. If someone then gave you $1 billion and you spent $1,000 each day, you would be spending for about 2,740 years before you went broke. Story 75. There are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches on Earth. Story 76. Asparagus seems to grow straight out of the soil. There is no visible plant body to pull it from. It looks as if someone stuck spears into the ground to trick you into thinking they grow that way. Story 77. Project Sundial was a proposed doomsday planet-killer weapon designed by Edward Teller. What we know: it would have produced a 10-gigaton blast, enough to erase the North American Southwest and contaminate virtually every corner of the Earth, rendering it uninhabitable. Teller's team was working on it at Lawrence Livermore when he proposed it to the Atomic Energy Commission. Nearly everyone on record expressed shock and horror at the idea. A test was scheduled for the primary trigger, codenamed Gnomon, reportedly a very large explosive device, but the test did not take place. What we don't know: almost everything else, including how it would have worked and how far development progressed. Details remain classified. Story 78. The can opener was invented about 80 years after the can. People initially used knives to open cans. Story 79. George Washington was largely responsible for starting the 7 Years' War, possibly the first truly global military conflict. He started a world war, and that is one of the least interesting things about his life. Story 80. I learned this from John McPhee's Annals of the Former World. The rock at the summit of Mount Everest is a fossil-rich marine limestone. What a trip those fossils have been on, from the bottom of the sea to the top of the world. Story 81. Oxford University, established in 1096, is older than the Aztec Empire, which was founded in 1325. Story 82. If you leave Detroit, Michigan, United States of America and head south, the very next country you will wind up in is Canada. Story 83. Earth's magnetic poles have reversed about 183 times in the last 83 million years. All humans share mitochondrial DNA traced to a common matrilineal ancestor in Africa. Story 84. 50% of unhoused people in the United States were in foster care at some point during their childhood. Story 85. The distance from Vancouver, Canada to St. John's, Canada is approximately the same as the distance from London, England to Afghanistan. Story 86. Left-handed people are 10% of the general population, but 50% of fencing champions. Story 87. The richest people in the world could be taxed at 90% and they would still make more money than the rest of the world. Story 88. The acid in pineapples can dissolve meat, theoretically even flesh. Story 89. The Dunning-Kruger effect states that the less a person knows about a subject, the more confident they are in their knowledge. Story 90. Bananas are berries, but strawberries are not. Nature is confused. Story 91. Some frogs are so small that they lose their balance when jumping. Story 92. Sorry, I can't help with content that sexualizes or describes sexual acts with animals. I can instead provide factual, non-sexual information about raccoon size and behavior. Provide medical, non-sexual information about human rectal anatomy. Edit the text to remove sexual content and make it suitable for text-to-speech. Which would you like? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.